Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our viewers of Shorts. I've got a very, very special guest with me who I'm going to introduce, in a short while. But before that, for those of you who are new listeners or new viewers of Shorts, Shorts is a series of, conversations with business, HR, and other leaders. And the idea is to get different perspectives on different aspects of leadership, culture, talent management, etc., which is what Think Talent sort of in a way specializes as a consulting company. And this whole series is hosted by our, talent management practice. The knowledge series of the talent management practice is actually called Talent Coven, which is, how do you manage talent without wizards and witches? So that's what Shorts is all about. I have today Sandhya, and let me just call her Sandhya because she herself mentioned that she's got a long name, so I'm just going to use her first name. She's the global head of learning, leadership, and culture for IKS Health. And she's had a illustrious career, actually, long stints with several global banks and some of the best known banks in the country before joining IKS. So she's worked with RB, Royal Bank of Scotland, Bank of America, ABN AMRO, and I think even DBS. So some of the best practices around culture, talent, leadership, I'm sure she's learned with some of these global companies, which of course now she brings to IKS Health as well. So Sandhya, welcome and thanks for giving time for this conversation. So let me Sandhya launch straight into the question. So you worked for a long time with banks, and obviously you bring all that experience into your current position at IKS Health. So let me start with a very broad-based thing. Do you see IKS Health from a leadership talent point of view being very different from the some of the global banks you work with?
So I would say that leadership and leadership tenets do not change. They seem to be uh, across verticals. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been in different verticals in the banks. I've also seen the captives of the banks, and what I've figured out is that there is no common template for leadership.
Mm.
So there is no success template. But yeah, there are certain behaviors, certain traits that works across industries and works for people leading people.
Mm. And therefore, what you're also saying is that you see uh, leadership as primarily being leaders leading other people kind of a thing. Is that how you define leadership, or do you have an added definition to that definition?
Um, so yes, one of the aspects is managing people, and that at a certain level you need to possibly let go of the cognitive skills that got you where you are.
Mm.
So I would say those are the boosters that you need to let go. Of course, you would have reached the success that you've seen with the cognitive skills, but yes, being able to have the drive, the ability, and inspire is what makes a leader.
Mm. Mm. No, that's a great point. And I'll come back to that letting go piece in a little while, because I think that's possibly one of the most difficult tasks of leadership. But I'll come back to that in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about the landscape as you see it today, Sandhya. How do you see the overall talent landscape? Particularly since your company, as I understand, has close to 6,000 people across India and the US, and largely across India and US, and you're a very specialized healthcare company in some ways. You're not the typical KPO BPO kind of a company, but if you were to look at your industry, but also a broader aspect of the talent landscape in India, what are the three, four things you would say would be trends which we should watch out for?
I think the biggest trend has been the hybrid model itself, which has transformed most organizations. That is one. So the concepts, the philosophies that worked earlier may no longer work, and
Mm-hmm.
this is a crucible phase. I'm sure nobody has answers on what's going to work, but I think it's a testing phase. That's what is important, and of course, no longer believing that you can create the product and then just have your users use it, as
Hmm.
against really looking at the various transition points of your employees, and I'm talking about what we do in our space every day,
Mm-hmm.
and building experiences that people want to come back to, as against saying this is my product, you have to use it, or I'll mandate it, I'll create a policy around it. That doesn't work anymore.
Mm. And does that also mean that if you are looking at employees as customers, then the same would apply to employees as well, that you're almost creating, new experiences almost on the go?
Absolutely. And I think that's been my philosophy all across my professional career, that you cannot force adult, to come and learn or train or give them what you think is right. It has to be something which has to be a pull rather than a push.
Right.
And that has to happen. Then you have to create the right experiences for them, the right assets available for them to use at the point where they need it, as against where I want them to really go and use it. So
Hmm.
that is the biggest shift for capability building, I would say, in terms of the new landscape.
Right. So you talked about hybrid, you talked about experiences, and you talked about, providing experiences in a particular way which is relevant to the individual, and almost to the tune of personalization for the individual. What are the trends you are seeing around leadership and around aspects of culture, beyond just individual talent?
So obviously, most organizations were today grappling with building their own culture, organizational culture, which has to be the core. Now, with the pandemic, there is another, I would say, spanner thrown at you, which is the hybrid culture, which no longer was there. So, first is your culture, and does it agree or disagree with the hybrid culture?
Hmm.
That's the story that you need to build. The leadership development itself, now you have to develop not just leaders who can inspire when they are in front of you, but also when they are not in front of you. So the age old adage which says that your leadership is known not in your presence but in your absence,
Hmm.
uh, holds good today. And that's what is the challenge, that we have to develop those kind of leaders, so truly inspirational leaders who can leave a mark, by role modeling, by endorsing. Those would be, I think, some of the leadership development opportunities that the current environment provides us.
Hmm. 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 So Sundar, talk a little bit more about that. You talked about inspiration, and you talked about, inspiring even when the leader is not there, right? So almost not present, at least physically, in front of the individuals every day, kind of a thing.
Yes.
What kind of things do you think leaders therefore need to do or practice to develop that skill, or that capability, or that, whatever, that competence, if I may call it that?
Okay. I think, unfortunately or fortunately, if you see the corporate world, though I at the start I started off saying it's drive, ability, and inspiration that is required in every leader. Somehow, it's always been drive, ability, and likability. Now, there's a difference between likability and inspiration, right? You
Hmm.
can be likable, but you cannot inspire. So that is the difference. That inspiration is more about being able to motivate and drive somebody to do things, just by the role modelship, or by really being there when they needed you the most, or being able to take tough calls at times,
Hmm.
because a popular leader is not made by taking easy calls and saying, okay, I want to be a likable person, but taking
Right.
tough calls. That's
Hmm.
more important. Yeah.
Right. Right. But in that, and I'm using the word "but" very deliberately. Uh, you know, Leaders have, for many years, people who are today in senior positions have operated with a particular level of, control, and almost inspiring through personal presence and charisma and all that. And there is enough literature to say that, there are some of the leaders, even at the global stage, who are very charismatic, right? And that's how they carry people through. So what is changing now? Obviously the physicality of the leadership thing is changing. But are you also saying that charisma and likability, as you called it, are not as important, and therefore what replaces that then?
No, I'm not negating that charismatic leadership does work. There are likable leaders, but is it a long-term business model? May not be. So you may be able to create some followership. You may have a few followers for a few days or some time, but if you have to look at a long innings, and if you want to really get organizations to be successful, innovate, build culture, build entrepreneurial leadership, uh, just being likable or charismatic leaders may not work. So you need to have a lot of combinations. And as I said, there is no specific template for success or a leader's success profile. A lot also depends upon the culture, the the environment, where you are. All of that comes to, and that's the I would say the play that has to be figured out. What works in some scenarios may not work in another scenario.
Right.
Yeah. Like Steve Jobs is supposed to be the most successful leader, but if you actually really do a bit of diagnosis, the number of failures he had is much more than the number of successes that he saw in his entire career spanning from 79 to 2011.
Right. Right. Yeah. Actually, that's true. And of course there is a lot of people who do say that in order to how do you put it, become a successful leader, you need to necessarily go through a few failures yourself, because otherwise you don't really see the downside, kind of a thing. So failure is one aspect, but tell me a little bit more. In companies you work with, and I'm sure there is a large young population as well in many of these companies. What do they truly get inspired by? What are the three or four things that you'd say will inspire the younger population? Because they are the most critical, vocal, demanding of leadership, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So what inspires them?
I think, like every generation, this generation is also, experimenting, trying to figure out. I think the best part of this generation, or the new generation, the millennials we call them, they're pretty application oriented, because that's what they've been doing, right? They want to look at everything is something which they want to try, test it, and if it works, they want to stay and they want to see the outcomes of it. So one is, the purpose is very important for this,
Wow.
at this level. So being able to provide the purpose, the why behind why they should be doing some of the capability activities or the engagement, or that's very important for them. And I think the other piece is, one formula doesn't work, as I was saying. Providing different types of experiences, be it classroom, be it digital, be it simulation, be it even tips and tricks that, hey, this is how this might work in the space where you want to use it. It's as good as the case of a YouTube, right? When every time you want to learn, you go to the YouTube, say, I want to how to do this. So that is the moments that you capture of learning, or the moments where you really need something as a capability, in inducement. That's more important.
Mm-hmm. So Sandhya, uh, that's one aspect of. So you talked about the purpose and the fact that people want to stay with something which works for them in a particular context, kind of thing. Uh, are there other aspects of inspiration which for example leaders need to necessarily learn, particularly when they are not going to be present? Of course, you talked about role model, being a role model, and how do you spread that role modelship, if you will. But are there particular things leaders need to pay attention to in today's environment? Almost like, let's say, for example, one of the people I was talking to was saying that leaders now need to be much more observant than they have been in the past, because the ability to observe and imbibe very, very, very carefully is going to be a very special skill which will be required, particularly when you are managing large teams in a remote environment and so on and so forth. So are there some other things which come to your mind based on your experience, saying here are two, three very concrete things I think leaders need to pay attention to?
So I agree that humanization is an important aspect of being a leader. So being, saying that I'm as human as you are, is important. Being able to connect with one on one or with one to many, that connections that you can have, whether it is in person or virtual, that's important. Being genuine, being able to even accept failures in front of your team, being able to accept the fact that there might be mistakes that happen, and how do we learn from it is more important, because at any given point of time, it is not just about leaders who have answers to everything that works, but people want to see the human leader,
Hmm.
who is just like them. They can follow him or her. They can also see that they can do mistakes, but they learn from it quickly, and they are able to figure out, as they say, right, that innovation happens at the edges.
Hmm.
And that's more important, that innovations are not something which suddenly come and you wait for that big idea, but that exact moments where you can innovate, incremental innovation, that's where the leaders agility comes out to say, yeah, this is
Hmm.
the moment that we need to pick up and we should not now start innovating. So I think that's an important aspect of a
Hmm.
leader.
Hmm.
And entrepreneurship, am I being an entrepreneur, and am I allowing my teams to be an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
so that they also start thinking innovatively? Because the biggest failure is organizations are waiting for that big innovation to happen, but they don't provide the freedom for innovation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's an interesting viewpoint. So I'm going to pick up a couple of aspects out of that, Sandhya, which you talked about. So one is that about being humane and being genuine and accepting your failure. I prefer to use the word leaders being vulnerable. I think the challenge, of course, is that historically people have been told that leaders have to be superhuman. They should not almost show vulnerability. So let me ask you: are you almost saying that we now have to go back on that and say, yeah, superhuman leaders are passe? Is that what you're saying?
um, I think a leader need not be a superhero. um, that's the point, that yes, they have certain aspects, tenets, traits which help them to be either the leaders, lead a set of people, build followership, build culture, but they don't have to be superheroes. So because that's the kind of, and not every leader is wearing a cape, so that's not required. So the more human you are, the more people are able to relate with you,
Hmm.
and at times the best ideas don't reside in the boardrooms. They are somewhere deep in the alleys of your organization.
Hmm.
And if you are
Hmm.
able to reach out to those people and who feel that they really can come and make a difference, that's what is a leader's task, I would
Right.
say.
Right. You talked right in the beginning in the conversation about letting go, and I want to come back to that and this theme of innovation at the edges, which you talked about. That how do you let go and involve everybody so that ideas are coming from every nook and corner in the company. How do you do that? So if you think about your experiences and leaders you worked with, what is it that you have seen in such leaders? That how do they do that letting go piece? Because and which finally then leads to a betterment of the organization, whether in terms of innovation or other things. What is it that the leaders really do on the ground?
I think one is a leader should be able to challenge, as I was saying, that when you say it cannot be done, and if I have to challenge it, the leader needs to be sure that he'll be able to do it. And in all my past experiences, I have seen leaders who've said, if you can't do it, I will do it and show you. So that is more of a role modelship, saying that, hey, you know what, it is possible. The second bit is to not, I think the biggest mistakes that all of us do is we do not want to dwell on our failures,
Hmm.
and we over analyze our successes. But good leaders do not spend a lot of time on the success. That's done, celebrated, let's move ahead. But the failures is something which, as humans, we want to not look at. We do not want to really diagnose, really understand what went wrong, and where is that, as I said, that edges of innovation where this could
Right.
have made a difference. And I
Right.
think that's the difference between leaders who are able to figure that out and say it's okay to fail. And if you see, most big organizations have embraced failures, and the more they fail, the better they become, is their philosophy.
Hmm. So tell me the other thing, and at a more practical level, when you are designing, leadership interventions or culture-related interventions, particularly, etc. Are there areas which you are focusing on now, which are very different from what you may have been doing before the pandemic? Are there specific areas you're focusing on now which are very different?
I think, the intent, as I said, how do you build connections and
Hmm.
how do you build psychological safety in your teams?
Right.
Knowing that now it's a hybrid model and it is okay that some folks may not be in office all the time. And the leader's biggest challenge would be, how do I build drive, ability, and inspiration and not fall to drive, ability, and likability?
Hmm.
Because it is quite human to like the people who are always around you
Right.
and are part of your, the yes club. So
Yes.
how do you build that? I think that is the kind of programs that the focus has to be, and that's where we are focusing on. How do we build psychological safeties in the teams? How do we allow people to look at innovation not as that big game changer, but look at it from the lens of incremental, small innovations?
Mhm.
Every cognitive problem solving is a step to innovation, is what we are actually focusing on.
Right. Right. So, Sandhya, as you've given a very wide set of things, and while, if I may be a little challenging with you, while on one hand you said that leaders are not superhuman, but the qualities you've laid out actually make the leader quite a bit of a, person with a cape, because it's very difficult for a person to have all of the stuff you're talking about, and yeah, I'm just joking, but it's a tough ask, it's not an easy ask, and of course nobody guessed that the pandemic would fundamentally change organizations and societies in such a large way as they have. So I think none of us were really prepared. So I think leaders have a interesting task ahead of them is all I can say. As we go ahead. But tell me, as we come to the end of this conversation, last couple of questions, and both are slightly personal questions, so you can choose to answer them in whatever way want. So one is that I'll give you both the questions and you can answer them whichever way, right? So one is, what has been your deepest personal learning in the last couple of years, particularly from a work perspective, right? That when you talked about hybrid work and the element of workers, workplaces, as we talk about, what have been one or two of your key learnings? And second, uh, in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months, what are your own learning goals? What are you trying to learn as a leader? What have you set out for yourself to do? Yeah. So those are the two questions, towards the end of this conversation. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Um, so I would say, my biggest learning, or what I've experienced and sometimes uh, fumbled across it, is that uh, you need to understand the business that you are into. So whichever part of the organization you are, just knowing what you do is not good enough, but
Mhm.
knowing that how it interconnects, how it is independent as a function, and how it has interdependence across the various functions, and even the market dynamics of where you are and what you do is very important. And you and I mean, again, you may say it's like a cape answer, but it's not good enough to say that I know my stuff very well, but I don't need to know the business, because I'm dealing with human beings. So I know human psychology quite well, because I've done a lot of psychology in my, in my career. But that doesn't help, because you have to speak the language that your customer knows. So it's not
Mhm.
good enough throwing a few jargons. You can impress people with a few jargons, but they don't stay with you long. So uh, less is more has been what my learning has been
Mhm.
across organizations. How do you make it simple, uh, de-scope away the complexities, make it easy for whoever you are with to understand? And your second question was, what is it that I am trying to learn myself? I think it is again the same, that um, it's experimentation phase. The hybrid model, though I said that it is about connections, it's about how do you build leaders who can be present in their absence. Now that's the biggest task,
Mhm.
right? Because uh, you have to build qualities like trust, you have to build qualities like followership, you have to build the biggest quality of how do you inspire people to do more.
Yeah.
Um right? So those are the things that is not an easy answer, but I'm sure there are a lot of knowledgeable people who are trying to figure out how do you actually accomplish the task of figuring out all of this. So yes, I think mentorship, coaching, those are the tasks, those are the areas which possibly will be more important as we move ahead in a hybrid space. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandhya, for being, very incisive with your comments. And I must say, a lot of clarity in this conversation. I'm sure we can continue this conversation, given that you have interest in this topic and I have a lot of interest in this topic. But
Yeah.
for purposes of shorts, we will end the conversation here. And I do look forward to, having a, let's say, in-person conversation in addition to this virtual conversation we've had so far at some point of time, not too far in the near future. So thank you again for your time. I'm sure our viewers and listeners have really enjoyed this, and I look forward to continuing our conversation in some form or the other as we go forward from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and look forward to our conversations.